Effective leaders do a number of things well. One of the things they do best is tell stories. But they don't just tell any particular kind of story, they tell stories that I call nested narratives. And I want to explain what a nested narrative is and a little bit how to use such a device and why it's an effective leadership communication practice. Earlier in another video, I talked about narrative, and I said that a narrative is a story with a beginning, middle, and end. It has some characters and it has a plot. And the plot is determined by a challenge or choice. So in a good narrative, there always has to be a moment where you're not sure, as the listener or the audience, what's going to happen. So that's the plot part, the challenge or choice. And you've got some characters who are going to have to reconcile or deal with that challenge or choice. And then you move sort of through time from beginning, middle to end. That's the basic structure of a good narrative. Now, a good leader can practice telling a good story, but in a particular way that's a little bit different than any other kind of story. A nested narrative has three parts. It has a story of self, a story of us, or what's also called a story of we, and a story of now. It's got three different narrative components involved in it. And the one narrative is nested inside the other, which is nested inside the other. What I mean by that is that a good leader will tell a story about himself or herself. She or he will say, this is my story, this is part of my life, this is who I am, this is what I value. That little story will include a challenge or choice, will include some characters, will have the same basic structure of a narrative. After they've told that story of themselves, they pivot, and in rhetorical terms, they pivot from what I call the I to the we. So they pivot from a story about themselves, so I did this, I did that, I went through this thing in my life, to we. And that's when they move from a story of self to a story of us. When they pivot to the we, they understand themselves in relationship to a larger collective. So we are going to do this, we are going to do that, we are facing this particular challenge. The reason you move from the I to the we rhetorically is that it's a mechanism for people to feel closer to you. So when you tell your story of yourself, you can just be engaged in what we called in interpersonal communication, self-disclosure. You just give some details about yourself. But that's not enough. Well, it's enough in an interpersonal setting for one other person to feel closer to you. But it's not enough if I want to lead an organization or a whole group of people. I'm trying to draw a larger group closer to me if I'm practicing leadership skills. To do that, I need to explain how my story is related to our story, to some story of us or some story of we. So I enter a second narrative phase when I'm speaking, in which I move from the I to the we. The final bit of storytelling I need to do is a story about where we are now, what challenges or choices we're facing collectively. If I can do that, if I made people feel closer to me and made people feel like we're in us, and I've done that through my own story as a starting point, I can tell those people, well, we are at this particular place. We're now facing this particular challenge. When I've done that, I will be able to motivate those people to act in particular ways. So this nested narrative technique is a technique of motivation. And if you want to look at an excellent illustration of this, Barack Obama's speech, Grant Park speech when he won the presidency, several of Barack Obama's earlier speeches, they include this story, I was a boy, my father's from Kenya, my mother's from Kansas. He tells this story about himself. Then he pivots to a story about America. We Americans are all in this place now, and we're facing this particular challenge or that particular challenge. You can read Obama's early speeches as a master class in nested narratives. But nested narratives work for leaders of organizations as well. I'm this kind of person, this is how I grew up. We in this company are all like this in a particular way. Now we face this particular challenge. So nested narratives work to motivate people and to draw them closer to you as a leader.